Okay, in this Resetter TV episode, I interview Dr. Jason and Melissa Saunders as they talk about the power of oxygen therapy. So that's hyperbaric oxygen is transforming mental health. It's also transforming the athletic world, and it's speeding up injuries and getting people healthier quicker than ever. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about the science. We're going to talk about how you can use one of these, and we're going to talk about the applications for hyperbaric oxygen. Get ready. Okay, Resetters. So I am super excited to bring to you guys two of my favorite people who are doing incredible work in the world. So let me just start off by welcoming Dr. Jason and Melissa Saunders. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Of course, Mindy. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mindy.
Yeah.
Favorite people.
I love when we can get favorite people together talking about amazing things in the world and how to help people. So I know you guys know about the Resetter group. I know that, Melissa, you're actually a Resetter yourself. You're a member in there. This week is Fast Training Week. And we are the topic has been metabolically flexible. So we've been talking about mitochondrial health and cellular health. So this is just absolute perfect timing to talk about oxygen. So why don't we start off with this? Why don't you guys tell us how you got into the world of oxygen and specifically hyperbaric oxygen therapy?
Let me tell that one?
Yeah, you go.
So basically, I had an injury, really is what it was. So we're chiropractors also, and I was re-roofing my house 12 years ago. It seemed like a good idea. So I was lugging shingles up a ladder and literally like hammering and nailing a new roof in my house.
During our lunch breaks.
Not a good idea. Not a good idea.
No. So anyway, at one point during that process, I herniated a disc, and I'm left with right-sided drop foot.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Like straight up on my back for a few weeks. Obviously, Melissa's working on me. So I was getting better in terms of like the acuteness of the disc. And then, probably 10 days, 2 weeks, I was back to work, but I was still left with the right-sided drop foot. And so 6 months later, a year later, year and a half later, it's still basically no strength or feeling in my right leg or foot. So we were at a conference actually in Vegas, and they had, vendors kind of like how we do. And, there was a guy with a chamber, and I had no idea what it was. It just looked interesting to me. So I said, hey, are you doing demos? Could I try it? So I jump in, I do like a 30-minute session, hop out, and I start walking around the vendor area. And all of a sudden I start getting like pins and needles in my foot in a way that I hadn't had in, so long. And so I started wondering, hey, is that feeling in my foot have something to do with that thing I just did? So I went back, I spoke to the guy for a little bit. So he agreed. He actually did like 8 hours of sessions for me on and off throughout the 4 days I was there.
Wow.
And I had left there with about like 15-20% recovery in my foot.
Wow.
Right away, I was like, I don't even know. I still didn't even know what it was at the time. But it was enough to say, I know I need this. So I bought one, I brought it home. I think I treated for about 4 months. And at that point, I got full function, full feeling back in my foot, and have never had a problem since. So it was obviously, for me, it was a very meaningful process. And it was interesting because, as a chiropractor, I'm thinking, hey, listen, I'm exercising, I eat pretty well, I'm getting adjusted, I'm getting work done, like I'm doing everything right, and the body heals itself, doesn't it?
Right.
So why after 18 months, but what I wasn't realizing at the time, and what we've really started to put together now over the last, decade plus is, yeah, totally, it's true. But if you have deficiencies, some of those deficiencies can still linger and not allow your healing. And one of those deficiencies might be oxygen.
Yeah.
In my case, that's what it was.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I've actually talked with several of the guests that we've had on Resetter TV is that we live in such a toxic time right now that intelligence that the three of us were taught about it back in chiropractic school, 23 years ago, there was very little you had to do to the human body to get it to heal. Now, it's not really the case because we're living in such a different environment.
Very
Absolutely.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what is, just for people who've never heard of hyperbaric oxygen, talk about what it looks like, what is it, and then how it works. Because we just brought one into our clinic, as you guys know, and it's been really fun to play with it. But the explanation of it and what it does has been a little bit challenging.
Sure. So there are a lot of ways to deliver hyperbaric oxygen. So there are soft chambers, which is what you basically have in your office. There are hard chambers that are either steel or acrylic. They're capable of different pressures and different oxygen levels. But in any version of it, as soon as you start to add, we use the word oxygen to describe it so often, but it's really more about pressure than it's about oxygen. And so as soon as you're in some type of environment where there's increased pressure beyond, we live at sea level, you live at sea level basically. So, right. So beyond sea level, anything, any more pressure than that, you start to create a gradient that allows your body to absorb more oxygen than what you and I are able to get, right. So depending on what that setup looks like and how much pressure, and then if you add oxygen, like you have the concentrator, you add some type of oxygen supplement on top of that, more pressure, more oxygen creates a bigger gradient. And the larger the gradient, the more oxygen you can drive into the system.
So here's what I would think if I was listening to this for the first time, I would say, can I just go outside and go for a run and just drive more oxygen into my body that way?
Right. So remember Boyle's law back from science class, like Jason was saying, we can think of oxygen as a nutrient, and a lot of us walk around and we have enough, right? We have enough to function. We have enough to be fine. But kind of, I'm sure like how you talk about detox is, if you're just under par with oxygen and you run into some sort of a problem, whether it's mold exposure or toxicity or a neurological thing on your foot, you're going to be more likely to suffer. And so, yes, getting outside and getting fresh air is so good for us. You talk about the benefits of light and being outside anyway. That's so healthy for our mitochondria and so, so important. But, according to the gas laws, the only way to absorb more gas is, like Jason said, it's not necessarily the oxygen, it's the pressure that's the magic part of the formula.
Yeah. So like whether you're exercising, like going for a run, or people ask about HBOT a lot, exercise with oxygen therapy. So it's the same idea. If you start to exercise, two things happen. Your heart rate goes up and your respiration goes up automatically. And it does that because you literally need to bring more oxygen to your working tissue. And now you're creating more carbon dioxide. So you need a way to get rid of that carbon dioxide faster. So the body immediately starts to adapt to the exercise by drawing in more oxygen and releasing more carbon dioxide. And as you do that, you get more oxygen turnover. Absolutely. And so exercise is definitely a way to drive more oxygen. And like exercise with oxygen, like the HBOT systems, those are high. Right now we're breathing 21% oxygen. The oxygen concentrators deliver 96% oxygen. So in that system, what you're doing is you're exercising, and instead of breathing 21%, you're breathing 96%. So now
that's a big difference.
A huge difference. So as you're exercising and as you're breathing, you're being exposed to higher oxygen levels, and the increase in supply and demand allow you to drive more oxygen.
Right.
Now, that being said, the biggest difference between, and why pressure is so important, the biggest difference between a regular workout or an HBOT session versus something like hyperbaric is that right now, the way our body works is our body carries oxygen via hemoglobin and red blood cells. And so right now you're about 97, 98% saturated. And if you had a tank or an oxygen concentrator, you can go from 98 to 100, but under no circumstance can you ever get more than 100% saturated. Right? That makes sense?
Yep.
And so if you increase supply and demand through a workout, you can unload oxygen faster. You can unload carbon dioxide faster. So you could drive more oxygen in.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in a chamber and you're under pressure, you're literally bypassing the red blood cell carrying capacity altogether.
And it's
So
going
all of a sudden, because of pressure and gradients, things go from high concentration to low concentration, right? And so right now we're both at equilibrium with the 21% oxygen that's in our air. When you're in a pressurized environment, the gradient outside your body goes up.
Okay.
As the gradient goes up outside and you continue to breathe, the oxygen outside is greater than inside. You're literally creating a gradient to drive that oxygen. Now, instead of just filling up red blood cells, you're literally going to dissolve oxygen into the plasma of the blood. So under normal circumstances right now, while we're having this conversation, there is literally no oxygen in our plasma. There's no need for it. But under pressure, you're dissolving oxygen directly into the fluid of the body, and it becomes a reservoir for that surplus. So that's the biggest difference between the two.
So go ahead.
That explanation, and then really simply, because we get that all the time.
Yeah, translate for us, please, Melissa. It's okay. We need the science guy. We need the science guy.
I mean, clearly he knows what he's talking about. He is like the expert in this field. But our Facebook cover page for our Facebook HBOT USA, it's one of those short 1.5-minute cartoon explainer videos where it's like exactly what happens.
Yeah, so these guys have a growing YouTube channel called HBOT USA, and you have great videos on there. So please go to that and look at it if you want to know more around it. I was thinking as you were talking, Jason, is that so when I first got the chamber, I was like, there was a subset of patients that I couldn't wait to try it on, and one of them is a patient of ours who's this top elite Spartan racer, and he's dealing with some memory issues. And we've done some heavy metal detoxing with him, which has been great. And that was a layer of help. So he's been in the chamber now 3 times. And he told me the other day that one of his jobs, he works in a warehouse situation, is that he goes and he looks at license plate numbers. It's like an auto body shop. They look at license plate numbers. He has to memorize the license plate number and then walk across the warehouse, go into his office and enter the number into the computer. And what he tries to do is he tries to make it a game for himself. He doesn't write it down because he's trying to keep his memory in tip-top shape. So he told me on Monday that one of the things that happened after 3 sessions in the chamber was he was walking with the number in his head, the license plate number. He got to the office, the phone rang, he picked up the phone, he had a full conversation, and then he went to his computer and he still remembered the number.
That's awesome.
So
isn't that cool?
Yeah, and I can totally understand that because, Mindy, as you know, I ended up using the chamber when I got hit with Lyme, neurological Lyme. And one of the things I can tell, one of the signs that I see that I need to get in the chamber is, if you're talking to someone and they're like, oh, you called the wrong number, you need to call this number, and they say the number, I'm either like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to remember this, or, oh yeah, no problem.
Right.
Yeah, that's that clarity, that memory, that like really easy to connect the pieces is one of the things a lot of people notice. That's so it's really fun. I had another woman last night who said to me she was going in again for the 4th time, I think. And I said, what do you think? And she goes, I don't know what's working here. I'm just so happy. And I go, what do you mean? She goes, I'm so happy. I have no idea why I'm so happy. I should not be this happy.
Right.
Yep. Back.
I want to bring something up about the brain function.
Yes.
There's a whole performance. We could talk about both of these along the way. There's not treating, but helping people with different kinds of conditions improve their health. And then there's like a performance side, right? So there's like 2 distinct ways we use the hyperbaric oxygen. On the performance side, especially brain, but really any body part, the brain is like 2% body mass. Like that's all it makes up, but it uses about 20 to 25% of our oxygen.
Oh, interesting.
So it's a massive metabolic user of that fuel, and it needs that for, again, just for normal function. Mm-hmm. So at one point, I think they did this study in Israel, what they said was, well, does the brain take up 20% of the oxygen because that's all that it needs? Or does the brain take up 20% of the oxygen because that's all the body could afford to give it because it needs oxygen for the rest of the systems? So what they started to do is they started to do experiments with dual tasking. You know what that is? Like, you know, basically multitasking.
Well, you mean what women do all the time, multitask?
It's very foreign to me, but
we're very familiar with that. Is that where you like hold a baby on your hip and you clean the kitchen while you talk on the phone? Yeah. We got that.
So yeah, so they started dual tasking these patients pre and post hyperbaric oxygen. And what they found across the board was after sessions, they were able to dual task, you know, at a much higher level than they were, you know, without that. So ultimately the answer became, well, that 20% is all the body can afford. And if we could give the brain more, it certainly would use it. And so
interesting.
To really dive into that now neurologically to see what the implications are. But
so if you have someone in your life that's not a multitasker and you want to make them a multitasker,
your husband another male in your life, yeah, maybe.
This is
an example.
This is really intriguing. I love it.
There's a reason that we go in together. I'm like, why don't you just hop in with me? Like, bring your work in there. We'll just chat and brainstorm.
Yeah, and we'll get into that in a moment because I always tell people, bring your books in, a lot of our patients are meditating. Jessica went in the other day and just started working, and she just moved from her desk to the chamber and worked in there. It's not restrictive. There's a lot you can accomplish in there. So go ahead.
In a hospital setting, chambers are filled with 100% oxygen.
Right.
There's a definite restrictive component there, and there's a lot of safety and potential danger because of how much oxygen is being filled into those chambers. In a setup like what you have, the ambient temperature is maybe 21.5%, 22%. The ambient air right now is 21%. So there's really no more risk in your setup than there is in the room that you're sitting in terms of, you know, any issues. And so that's why it becomes such a less restrictive environment.
Yeah, and we also have been using it for concussions. We had a boy who had a concussion, and I think I told you guys this story. His friends were leaning over the top, looking in, and it was really cute. So let's dive into the conditions, because again, I'm thinking like, you know, if I'm a resetter and I'm listening to this, it's like, well, why would I use it, and what conditions are you seeing really good benefits with?
So a lot, you know, some people say, I want to say this first. Some people say, like, can one tool really do all of that? You know, that's kind of the thought, like as if it's like a magical device. And maybe it is, but it's not because it's, you know, because it's magic. It's because every cell in your body uses oxygen.
Yep.
And most cells are sharing. There's this 100%, right? There's this limited capacity of oxygen that we have currently. And it has to go everywhere. And if you have little injuries, if you've had, you know, scar tissue from surgeries, if you've had a few concussions, if you've had a couple, you know, if you had Lyme and you have some mold sensitivity or toxicity issues, you know, your body's just trying to like bring as much oxygen to all these little places, but it's currently in a limited amount. And as a result of these sessions, it's no longer a limited quantity. And as your body creates that resource or that reservoir of extra oxygen, it's just able to disseminate that wherever it needs to go. And so all of a sudden, somebody going in for a concussion, you know, sees changes in their tingling in their fingers. Somebody going in for, you know, Lyme sees improvement in their, you know, cognition and memory. So, you know, you start to see a lot of interaction, you know, as far as that stuff goes. But, you want to name a few?
Well, yeah, one of the neat things too that we do on the YouTube channel is each week, even if we don't make it really known, you know, for us, there's a theme. And so each week we kind of have a theme as far as the conditions. So maybe it's all about like performance and recovery. And we do really short, really simple, like 2 or 3 minute videos on, like next week is going to be stroke. So we'll do a video on how or why it would work for someone with stroke. We often then will share a study and we'll literally like break down the study and simplify it. So the study that we share that will go on the channel next week is actually showing how people, I think it was like 6 to 36 months after the event, they were having dramatic results, which is really neat because they used to think that
permanent
right away, it was permanent. So, we see a lot of stroke and TBI, concussion, Lyme, just because of where we are. We see a lot of autism. We see a lot of people just wanting performance enhancement, like a lot of high class athletes, and there's also the stack, which a lot of people will talk about for something like concussion. Even if you're not noticeably affected by concussion, there's something that we all know of now called the stack. And so if you have, a concussion or a couple concussions, and then you're exposed to mold or toxicity, you're going to be way more sensitive to then jump into symptoms. So, a lot of people now are finding out about oxygen, and they're just even using it preventatively. But like you've mentioned, even if you think you're going in there and you're not going to necessarily notice something, most people even notice at least a little bit of something. If you're going in with like a dramatic deficiency, you're going to obviously notice way more than someone who's just going in for, some mental clarity or energy or things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking as you guys were talking that it's a little bit like stem cells. When we start to fast, you get, especially on the longer fast, you're getting the stem cell release, and you don't know where those stem cells are going to go to. But the intelligence of the body knows, and the intelligence of the body will figure out where to send it. It sounds to me like the oxygen's the same way, where whatever body part is in the most deprivation is where the oxygen is going to go first. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's been when it first came to us, that was what I wanted to let me hop in this thing. Let me see what results I get. And it's just been really incredible to watch different things sort of come back to life. One of the biggest things that I told you guys is my workouts have dramatically improved, and my desire to work out has dramatically improved. And, at 50, I caught myself going, well, maybe I'm 50. I should not be working out like I did when I was 30. I got like 3 sessions in, and I was just craving working out. I was like, and I would go out and I'd run, and then I'd want to run longer. So I can see the performance part in a big way. So. Yeah.
What's neat too that a lot of our community does is, there's a lot of people now with the Oura rings or other devices that help measure heart rate variability, which is a really good sign of kind of like you're talking about metabolic flexibility. It's like, how able are you to adapt to your life and your lifestyle? The higher your HRV, I'm sure your group knows this, but the better quality sleep you're going to get. So you might not need as much sleep. You might be able to function really well off like the occasional 5 or 6 hour. So a lot of people will notice dramatic improvement in their HRV.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about how long it takes. And I know this is the magic bullet everybody wants to know is like, okay, this sounds really cool. How long is it going to take before I notice a difference? I mean, we get this in detoxing, fasting, chiropractic, you name it. But do you have any kind of guidelines of like how frequent people should be doing it? How long that takes to see a result?
It is very similar to someone asking the same question, like how long is it going to take of fasting and ketogenic living that I'm going to notice a difference? It's going to be different for everybody. But that being said, we do have protocols.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could break it down into a lot of times when I lecture, we talk about short-term and long-term benefits. Mm-hmm. So, short-term benefits happen pretty quickly, a session or two, up to maybe somewhere between 5 and 10. And some of those include things like more energy, better sleep. You start to see some changes in immune system function. You start to improve mitochondria performance, efficiency. The mitochondria, we could talk about this later too, but the mitochondria is very oxygen sensitive. And so it's pretty interesting to know all the changes that actually go on inside the mitochondria as a result of that reserve oxygen. So, you start to see, some basic healing, basic energy changes, and basic immune system changes on that short-term list.
Right.
When you get into the long-term, which is really like once you're hitting 20 hours or more. And again, depending on what you're using it for could determine whether or not you're going to have that many sessions. But at that point, you start getting neovascularization, which is like literally new blood vessel growth. You get, 8-time stem cell release, both of bone marrow stem cells and central nervous system stem cells. You start to
get 20 hours?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
You start to get massive changes like microbiome, like really big changes in your immune system, like neutrophil activation and microbiome shifts in terms of getting probiotics fed and healthier and, you know, helping to recreate a balance of the healthy bacteria in your gut. You start to get better memory.
Right? I know. I would never. Maybe you need to get in there, Jason.
I need a session or two.
I did. I want to be sharp for resetters.
So
yeah,
you know, like the brain changes and the vascular changes and like the long-term mitochondrial changes are really more the sort of the long-term benefit effect.
Yeah. So I'm going to dive into the mindset of the resetters, because we have so many people in there that are, trying to lose weight. They're trying to reverse a diagnosis. They're just understanding about the mitochondria, which I think is so great, because that's the mitochondria is where all the magic happens in the cell. And then many of them they start off with good results, but then they get stuck. And they can't get past that stuck spot. So, and I know, Melissa, you do the Stenomics class, you teach people how to fast. And is this a tool you could use to get over the stuck spot?
Yeah, well, I think interesting, like how one of your clients mentioned, they're so happy.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think a lot of people, when they're going through ketosis and fasting, in our group right now, and in our private group, I'm actually having our members read the book Headstrong by Dave Asprey.
Yeah, love it.
A lot of what he talks about with this lifestyle is like that limitless feeling, that mental clarity, that happiness, that energy. And I do think as we're living this lifestyle, we do go through some slumps, especially as we're newer to it. The more flexible we get, I think those become less and less. And you can kind of like dip out a little bit and still feel that limitless energy. Hyperbaric is an amazing tool to help give you a little bit of a nudge as you're either new to it or as you slip out. So like personally, we were in a hotel this weekend. There was definitely some toxins.
I know. I'm still detoxing the stuff out. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I haven't felt what I felt from that in a long time. And literally the words in my head are like, oh my gosh, I feel normal. Like I'm not used to feeling normal. I'm used to feeling limitless. And so for me, Hyperbaric is one of those tools. Like today, I can feel like, ding, the lights are back on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of tools that do it, right? So it doesn't have to be Hyperbaric.
It's also, in our practice, it's also what we talk a lot about is the synergy between modalities. Because red light is great. It has a very specific effect and purpose on our body. Oxygen is great. It has a very specific effect and purpose on our body. Detox, fasting, keto, certain supplements, whatever you're doing, each one has a very specific effect and purpose. And when you're stuck, in my mind, it's often because one of those ingredients might be missing. We look to create synergy because I know that if we hit each step along the way, like here's a rate limiting factor. Well, everything's good until we get to that point. So we need to fix that. Now moving on, now everything's good until we get to this point. Okay, now we need to fix that. So I look at plateaus as, oh, that's clearly our next roadblock. Let's put that next piece into the picture and let's keep that ball rolling. And so the synergy is really, I think, where so many people break through and they're like, oh, now I'm getting it from here. Now we can move forward.
And all the therapies you guys use in your clinic, I'm sure are very similar like me. They're all going after healing the cell.
Absolutely.
And that, because the cell doesn't just have one requirement. And this is one of the teachings that I was sharing with the resetters this week is like ketones are great. They're awesome, but they're only one thing. We got to make sure we're eating the right fats. We have to minimize toxins. We got to get oxygen into the cell. We've got to get light in there. And I love the way you just explained that is that if you feel like you're in this lane of, I'm always doing keto, look at my meter, it's got all these ketones on it, but I don't feel great, or as great as I don't feel limitless, then what I just heard you say is that's when you go searching for another therapy to add in. Not take away, but to add in.
Exactly. I don't know if you bring up, like, we always talk about the plant analogy in our office a lot.
Oh, no, tell it. So, analogies are good.
So if you had a plant, right, and it wasn't doing well, so now it's just like sort of drooping, it's drying out, it's turning brown. So you're like, all right, I want to do an experiment, figure out, what this plant needs. So innately, we sort of know what the plant needs, but let's just say we wanted to break it out. So you say, okay, I want to control all the variables. So I'm going to take this plant, I'm going to stick it in a closet, and I'm just going to, and it's dry, so I'm going to start watering it. So you water it for 2 weeks, but you keep it in the closet because you don't want to change any of the other variables. And after 2 weeks, you pull the plant out. It's, it's not going to look any better. It's probably going to look worse. And so you might say, okay, well, clearly that plant didn't need water. So I'm going to stop watering it. I'm going to put it in the sunlight now, and I'm going to leave it in the sun for 2 weeks, but I'm not going to water it, and I'm not going to feed it, right? And so after a few weeks of straight sunlight, how's it going to look? Like even drier. So the point is that the plant needed water, it needed sunlight, it needed nourishment, and it needed to make sure that the soil was clean and not toxic. And a lot of times I see in our patients that, oh, well, I tried gluten-free diet. Well, and that didn't work, so I put that back, and then I tried ketosis and it got a little bit better, but, I didn't feel all the benefits. So I stopped doing keto, and then I started exercising and I got somewhat better. You know what I mean? So, and we're constantly putting like one piece at a time. And it's like, no, that plant needed all 5 of those things to happen all at the same time, all for a period of time. And innately, we know that about that plant, but for some reason, when we look at our own health, we don't look at it the same way. Because our cells, again, like you said, it's about the cell. As goes the health of one single cell in your body, as goes the health of your entire system.
Yep.
And so until you're getting all the right ingredients in, and all the ingredients that you needed to get out, that's when that function begins. And that could be a 3-step process for somebody, and that could be an 11-step process.
Right. Yeah. I feel like we need an amen on that one, or that was like perfect, because, you guys are, we're in the same business of helping people and of really taking these bodies that are struggling and giving them tools. And one of the challenges that I see is that the old school healthcare model was one diagnosis, one condition, one solution. And this is how we ended up in this healthcare mess that we're in right now. It doesn't work like that. And so you can't come to alternative or functional medicine, whatever you want to label it, and say the same thing. You have to look at it like an ingredients for what does your body need. And then you got to take it one step further and say, well, gosh, what Jason's body needs and my body needs are maybe totally different.
Right.
And
I think the